I was 18 years old working as a summer intern in a group home for teenage girls who were struggling with drug dependency. So I grew up in a middle class neighborhood, a white kid in the suburbs, two parents still married, dinner at the table. I had problems growing up that felt big at the time, but nothing was compared to this. Suddenly, I was surrounded by girls almost my own age whose life stories included abuse, prostitution, and gang involvement. I felt like I had stepped into a completely different world. That building always kind of stank of like stale coffee and cigarettes. Doors slammed, voices constantly echoed down the hallways. There was more cursing, yelling, fighting, and chaos in those few months than I had experienced in my whole life combined. I stayed very close to my supervisor. She was like my anchor. When a situation escalated, if voices got really loud, if there was tension, she would step in and handle it, and I would step back and watch. Until the last weekend of the summer. The entire internship had really been designed around that moment. They were training me to be able to run the house on my own for one final weekend while all the supervisors went away on a company retreat. They left and I stayed alone with 6 deeply hurt, deeply angry teenagers. At some point that weekend, I asked one of the girls to do something. I don't even remember what it was. What I do remember very clearly is her face just inches from mine. I could smell her breath. Her voice was so sharp and threatening as she cussed me out, and my supervisor was hundreds of miles away. In that moment, my body shut down. My chest tightened, my heart pounded, my thoughts raced. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And in that moment, I tried to go back to my training, and the only thing it offered me was a single phrase: stay calm. But those words were useless. Not because I didn't want to stay calm, but because I didn't know how. And that is the problem with that advice. Stay calm is one of the most common pieces of advice that we give to parents, and it's one of the least effective. We all know we should stay calm. We try, and sometimes we even succeed. Maybe once, twice, 5, 10 times. When our child doesn't listen, when they talk back, when they leave that fridge door wide open again, even though we've asked them a million times to close it. But eventually we snap, we yell, and then we turn on ourselves. We blame ourselves. We tell ourselves we should have been able to stay calm if only we had tried harder. But the thing is, calm is not a choice. It's a state. And it's a state we can only access when our nervous system feels safe. So telling the parent to stay calm when their nervous system is overwhelmed is kind of like telling someone to relax while they are drowning. And then beating yourself up afterward for snapping is like judging yourself for not relaxing while you were drowning. Most of us were not taught how to regulate our emotions as children. We were taught how to behave. We were taught compliance. Compliance means behaving correctly on the outside. And as parents, we tend to love compliance. But here's the problem. We learned how to look okay without learning how to be okay. What was missing was regulation. We were taught how to control our behavior, but not how to feel safety and calm and stability inside our bodies. So when we had big feelings as children, we were often told just to stop crying, go to your room, calm down. But no one taught us what to do with that sadness or fear or anger. So we learned to suppress instead of understand. We learned that our feelings were too much, and we learned that expressing them was not safe. And then without realizing it, we handed that same strategy to our kids. Generation after generation, we have passed down rules for behavior, but not tools for our nervous system that actually support healthy behavior. Not because we're bad parents, but because that's what we were given. And because it's so normal, we rarely see the cost. The chronic overwhelm parents live in, the guilt and shame good parents carry every day despite trying their very best, feeling like a failure even after trying everything. And our kids pay the cost too. Big feelings are normal, big behaviors are normal. But when kids experience them without the support they need, it leads to anxiety, explosions, or eventually shutting down. They learn that their feelings are problems instead of signals. We're asking dysregulated adults to raise regulated children and then blaming the parents when it doesn't work. What if the problem is not that parents cannot stay calm or that kids have these bad behaviors, but that we were never taught how to create calm in the first place? That realization changed everything for me. I wish I could tell you I had learned that lesson that first summer. I did not. Instead, I spent the next 10 years of my career working in some of the most intense behavioral environments you can imagine. Group homes, residential programs, kids with deep trauma and explosive behaviors. On paper, I was very successful. I was great at my job. I was respected and I was helping people. But my body was telling a very different story. I was sick all the time. Migraines, constant anxiety, just chronic tension in my chest and shoulders. I lived in like a low-level state of urgency that never really shut off. And I told myself it was just part of the work, part of being strong, part of caring. But then life turned the volume all the way up. I had 2 kids under the age of 2, and at the same time, my husband was dealing with some significant medical issues. Every coping strategy that I had relied on in the past completely collapsed. Because what I realized painfully and clearly was this: I wasn't actually handling my emotions at all. I was ignoring them, suppressing them, powering through, and it was costing me everything. That was the moment I knew something had to change. I went on my own healing journey. I worked deeply on my mindset. I learned how to actually process emotions instead of like pushing them down and hoping they would just somehow disappear. That changed everything. I had more energy, more joy, more capacity. Life started feeling lighter, not because it was easier, but because I was no longer fighting myself on the inside. Looking back now, I can see that moment when I froze at 18 was the first sign of a skill I never learned. It just took me 10 years and a lot of pain to finally learn it. And then as the shift was happening internally, something else started becoming very obvious externally. I was raising my kids, my friends were raising their kids, I had family members raising their kids, and I kept seeing the same pattern. Everyone was treating behavior like the problem. But our kids' behavior is more like a smoke alarm, right? A smoke alarm is loud, it's disruptive, it can feel overwhelming, but it's not the danger, it's the signal. You don't rip the smoke alarm out of the ceiling and then congratulate yourself for stopping the noise. You look for the fire. But this is exactly what we do with kids. A close friend of mine was just like at a loss with her child's behavior. She was angry, hurt, taking it personally. She felt like her child was being difficult, like on purpose just to push her buttons. But what was immediately obvious to me because of my professional background and all the personal work I've done was this: her child was not being difficult. He was signaling distress. And when I shared that perspective with her, honestly, just like you could see everything shift. Her shoulders dropped, her voice softened, her response to her child changed. And almost instantly when her response changed, so did her child's behaviors. She was amazed, and that was really the moment it all clicked for me. Understanding behavior without understanding regulation is incomplete, because a smoke alarm cannot turn off if the fire is still burning. And if we're teaching parenting strategies without teaching parents how to regulate, those strategies will always fall short. Dysregulated adults cannot consistently respond to dysregulated children. And that realization set me on a whole new path, helping parents stop reacting to the alarm and helping them look for that fire underneath the behavior. And then helping them create and build that internal capacity so they could create calm and respond with clarity instead of overwhelm. So all of this really came together for me, my own work learning how to regulate myself for that moment with my friend where, everything shifted for how she saw her child's behavior. And I realized something important. Some of these things were second nature to me professionally. Understanding behavior is communication. But that was completely new and incredibly relieving information for most parents. Because parents are not missing effort, they're missing a framework. They're trying to solve a complex behavior without a map. And that realization is what led me to create my process. Not a list of tips and not a rigid system and not a script to somehow follow in the heat of the moment, but a way to slow things down, understand what's actually happening, and respond with clarity instead of overwhelm. I call this 5-step process guide, because while we cannot force our child's behavior to change, we can guide them towards better behavior. We can't control their nervous system, we can't override development, And we can't punish our way into long-term regulation, but we can guide. We can create conditions that make better behavior more likely. We can respond in ways that teach instead of escalate. And we can support our kids as they build skills that are still developing. I spent years trying to stay calm by force, and guide is what I wish someone had given me instead. So the first step for guide is gathering data. Most parents come to me saying, my child is out of control, right? Or they're doing this or that. But that's not actually data. That's distress. So we slow it down. What exactly is happening? When did it happen? What happened before? What happened after? When parents start to gather this information without judgment, patterns begin to emerge. And when we start seeing those patterns, behavior becomes understandable instead of overwhelming. The second step is understanding your triggers. This is the step most parenting advice skips entirely. Before we try to change our child's behavior, we have to understand our own reactions to it. What does this behavior activate in you? Fear, anger, helplessness, shame? Because when a parent is triggered, their nervous system is in charge, not the thinking brain. And you can't offer regulation from a place of dysregulation. So this step is about learning to notice what's happening inside your body and creating enough safety to stay present instead of reacting. Then the third step is investigating the cause. This is where that smoke alarm metaphor really matters. If the behavior is the smoke alarm, this step is about looking for the fire. Is a skill missing? Is the demand too high? Is the environment overwhelming? Are they seeking connection? Are they trying to protect themselves? We want to understand what the child is trying to communicate. What is the reason behind the behavior? Because when a parent understands that, something powerful happens. They stop taking it personally. They stop asking what consequence should I give, and they start asking what support is missing. Which leads us into the fourth step, which is deter the behavior. That's where the prevention lies. Instead of waiting for that explosion, we change what happens before it. We adjust expectations. We teach missing skills. We modify the environment, not to eliminate all discomfort, but to create conditions where success is possible. This step shifts parenting from constant reaction to intentional design. And the final step is to encourage appropriate behavior. And this is where consequences finally make sense. Not punishment, not shame, but responses that reinforce what you want to see more of and stop reinforcing what you want to see less of. When encouragement is aligned with the cause of the behavior, it feels fair and it's very effective. It strengthens your relationship with your child instead of damaging it. And what makes guide different is not just any single step, but it's the order of the steps. We don't start with fixing the child, we start with understanding the system. We regulate the adult first, we understand the behavior next, and only then do we decide how to respond. Because when parents feel calm and clear on the inside, behavior stops feeling like this battle and it becomes information. That's where the real change begins. I want to take you back to that 18-year-old version of me standing in a group home hallway, heart racing, chest tight, a teenager screaming inches from my face. In that moment, I thought the problem was that I could not stay calm. But looking back now, I can see that I wasn't failing. I was missing a skill that no one had ever taught me. And the same thing is true for so many parents today. If you're exhausted, if you feel like you've tried everything, if you find yourself snapping and then drowning in guilt afterward, you're not failing as a parent. You were never taught how to create calm in moments that feel anything but safe. And here is the great news. This can get so much better. Not because your child's going to suddenly stop having big feelings, because they won't. And not because you're going to become perfectly calm overnight, because you won't. But because change does not start with control. It starts with understanding. Understanding what your child's behavior is communicating. Understanding what's happening in your own nervous system. Understanding that behavior is information and not a personal attack. When we stop trying to force calm and start learning how to create it, everything begins to shift. We respond instead of react. We guide instead of control. And our children feel safer, which makes better behavior possible. If I could say one thing to that 18-year-old version of myself, it would be this. You're not broken and you're not weak. You're simply at the beginning of learning something that will change you and that will change everything. This same thing is true for you. And if there's one thing I hope you remember, it's this. Your child doesn't need you to be perfectly calm. They need you to be willing to understand. Behavior is not something to control, it's something to listen to. And when we stop trying to silence the alarm and start looking for the fire, change becomes possible. That's where it starts.